Historical Society. Every April we do an annual meeting, so this is an opportunity for us to showcase for you guys some of the community connections we made in 2024, as well as our goals for 2025. And so this will just take 45 minutes to an hour or so not too long. No, just kidding. 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll get to the presentation that I think everybody's all anxiously waiting for. So first, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out. The reason that we do this and the reason that we have this historical society is the support of people like you in this room. Your attendance, your support, and your enthusiasm for history is what motivates us and drives us to continue making these events and showcasing the unique history of our local community. So I wanted to extend a thank you to everybody here today for coming out. Also wanted to thank our patrons that support us with their annual membership. Patronage each year is $25, so those of you that support us in that way, that helps us to use those monies for preservation purposes and to collect and preserve the history that we have brought into our collection. So we'd like to thank everybody for that. Also, we had a few outstanding donors this year that donated above that, and we'd like to extend a thank you to them as well. Their faith in our group is very humbling. 2024 was a year of firsts for us. We had 7 events in 2024. 3 of those were hosted here at Giesenbrau, so I wanted to extend a thank you to Erin and his crew for their hospitality that they always show us here. We also had 4 site events, so events that were out in the community. Last June, we had a tour of 123 Main Street, which was the old Thompson bowling alley back in the 1960s, currently the Honeyloo Boutique. July, we had our first ever garden tour where we sold 120 tickets for that, so that was lots of positive feedback on that as well. Members of the community invited the public to come into their homes and their private spaces to view their gardens and to view the history that was connected to their homes. August, we had the opportunity to go out to a prairie restoration project, and Father Kevin Clinton came out and discussed the prairie restoration that he's doing on his own family prairie. So it was an opportunity to learn from him. September, we had Greg Tukulski come out, and if any of you were on the trolley tour this September on Dozinki Sunday, that was a very fun time. We sold over 100 tickets for that tour, and Greg took people on a trolley ride around New Prague showcasing our unique history. So that was real fun too, and something that we hope to do again next year. 2025, we've had one event already in 2025. In February, we had our Connections and Collection event. At that event, we opened the doors and the cabinets to our collection, so that way the public was allowed to come in and see what we have. So it's not just what you're seeing on social media. You were able to dig through the files and open the books and view those photos in person. So that was a fun time as well. We also had we have coming up this Saturday, we have a May High Tea event in which we're going to be focusing on women's contributions to the community. We do also have 3 tickets, I think, left available for that event. So if you're interested in that, you can speak with Kelsey or Donna or Liza up there, and they can help you with that if you're interested. Besides these events, or in addition to that, we're also in works to have our historic home tour this summer. The details for that are coming soon, as well as the trolley tour, the same one we had this fall, showcasing that again this fall. Also, we will continue. We have a quarterly newsletter if you're interested in that. Going to our website, npareahistory.com, and at the bottom of the page, you can sign up for our quarterly newsletter, and also follow us on social media, Facebook or Instagram. We like to share our history there as well. We also have several community connections we've made throughout the year. We have displays at the New Prague Library that you're always welcome to visit. Log Cabin is open several times a year, and we have frequent genealogical inquests that we have that we help people field. We also started a podcast this year, so you can find that on whichever podcast station that you listen to. And we're always working on website updates to our website, npareahistory.com. How can you help support us in 2025? If you are interested in becoming a patron, you can talk to the ladies up here. Otherwise, you can also go to our website. That is $25 a year to become a patron. There's also, if you have an interest in genealogy and you would like to help us field some of the requests that we get, we'd love to have more people on that team fielding those. We also have an open board position, so if you would like to be a part of our team and you would like to help us put on some of the events, help us preserve our local history, you can chat with one of us here today as well, and we can connect you with those. So once again, thank you everybody for coming out. That concludes the annual meeting. I'd like to call Dennis Dvorak up now to speak on the history of brewing in New Prague.
Good evening, and it's always good to see familiar faces and new faces. You're just going to look at an old face here this evening. But I was approached at one of the gatherings that we should do a presentation on breweries. Well, I'm not a teetotaler, but I'm not someone who regularly comes to the brewery here, but it's a fascinating history which I found quite interesting, and I'd like to share some things with you this evening. But before I do that, I want to draw attention to what Kirsten had said regarding support for our organization. I recently had a chance to sit down with Archie Kutsina and review and discuss and copy some of the interesting aspects of his wife, Marie Fleechek Kutsina, who died not too long ago. And Archie provided that to us, and I'll be sharing part of that with the Historical Society in our oral tradition and history. But one thing that Archie did was that he wanted to become a lifetime member of the Historical Society. Now remember, or maybe you don't know, but Archie's 95 years old. And if that isn't an inspiration to some of you who may not be members, or should be members, or could be members, it just illustrates the fact that we don't have to come to those twilight years, the end of our lives, to understand and appreciate what has happened in this community. It's not celebrating me or the board or the organization necessarily. It's what we have done in the history to highlight the history of this community, which is very, very unique. So, maybe I should have you hold this. Were you an altar boy? In looking at the history of the brewing in New Prague, I relied on a number of sources, and mostly online resources. There are individuals who have found a passion for the subject and have posted wonderful chronological details regarding the breweries in New Prague. When I think of New Prague, and when I first came here 60 years ago this month to start teaching, what was most recognizable was the tower at the flour mill, Robin Hood Flour. And little did I know beyond that what had occurred previously. New Prague was the bread and butter city of Minnesota, and it also was the egg capital of Minnesota, unsurprisingly. All those chickens that ran loose in town, now we have that controversy establishing an ordinance to raise chickens. They ran wild in some cases from the Tukalski hatchery on Main Street. But other than that, they didn't cause any problem other than chasing my wife Linda through the high grass behind her home. Right? When we think of the brewery, in New Prague, there are two locations. One was the Kokesh property, which is down Marsh Street, the street that runs north and south behind the bowling alley. And it was called Marsh Street, and it was relatively well named because there were two ponds between that kind of formed a footpath between those two ponds called a street. And at the end of that street, there's a dead end, and at that dead end was one of the first locations of the breweries. However, the first location was the Radley, spelled Raddy, Radley, and Matthias Chaplowski Brewery in 1876. One of the interesting things when you're looking for details is the names change constantly. Whoever is writing down the details or the census records, they write it and spell it the way it sounds. So there is quite a change and a variation. You know, if you go down First Avenue south of the New Prague Times, almost to the end of the road, you'll see a large white home. And it's the turn of the century, but that's the location of the first brewery. The home was not built by Mr. Radley. It was built by a Heinen family member. So that was in 1876. Now that, so were people still drinking beer only at that time period or after that time period? They drank beer every chance or opportunity that they could, but they were brewing it at home and in various locations. So, like this evening, I was told by my former student, Mrs. Perko, that the Zelinkas had a brewery on their farm property, which is south of where my wife and I live. There was also a brewery and a saloon out on the Sklazacek farm on the way to Vesely, and it had a bowling alley. So this whole area was very lively, and beer was the center of, they revolved socialization around the drinking of beer and socializing and celebrating life. In 1900, Mr. Ratty was noted in the 1900 census, excuse me. He was a saloon keeper, and he was in Pine City. And if you know where Pine City is, it's kind of northwest of the Twin Cities, but Pine City had a large Bohemian population. And the names are different. They have different customs. They probably came from, obviously, from a different part of Bohemia. But nevertheless, once they all knew each other, there's a familiarity in terms of language. So it was kind of like a magnet. They all kind of gathered and found one another. Next was a brewery called the August Hall Brewing Company, and that was in New Ulm for a period of time, and he came here. Now, I haven't been able to find any information on it. It's kind of one of those things that disappeared with the generations. However, the next permanent brewery was the Minash and Kokesh Brewing Company on the same location as Mr. Radley. Now, in the spellings, they always put an S at the end of Minar, and that's because the correct pronunciation, if I'm correct, is Minash. Is that correct, Dave? And so that was kind of interesting. So when you're kind of sleuthing, you have to kind of be able to adjust into the different spellings and as you navigate and understand that there are variations. I'm not doing a very good job with my clicker. If we could find that slide of the Minash and Kokesh brewery, there it is. It was on the banks of Sand Creek, down at the end of Marsh Street. Now this is really a timely and valuable photograph because it just freezes in time something that we can hardly conceive. The whole family is seated in front of the brewery. You see the horses in the back pulling the wagon with the kegs, and all the members of the family are identified. And this brewery burned, and then it had to be replaced. But one of the members of this family is here this evening, and it's Dave Minnar. And I asked Dave if he would just say a few words of his recollections.
I won't bore you with many details, but what I was told is that my great-great-grandfather, Albert, immigrated. He came here about 1861 and partnered with Kokesh and built this brewery. But he didn't stay here. He took his younger family members and moved to Browerville. He split up the partnership with Kokesh, and he started a brewery in Browerville. He's buried in the cemetery in Browerville. We tried to search for his tombstone and without any success.
Now, the reason why they built this brewery here in this particular location is because Thomas Kokesh owned the land. He owned the land across the creek, and so today we're with the tennis court, and we're part of Chart is located, and down towards the northern part of that particular street, where the old high school and where the Central Education Center is located, that was all Thomas Kokesh land. It's been a while since I've been in the classroom, so you'll have to excuse me. Well, the kids used to laugh when sometimes when I did a faux pas, so you'll just, I appreciate your patience with me. The Thomas Kokesh Brewing Company was basically started in 1886 and through 1898. Now, Mr. Kokesh was born in Bohemia, as well as Mr. the Minars, but one thing that Mr. Kokesh did, he saw the value of kind of making this a family business, so he married Mary Minash, whose father, Albert, worked with Mr. Kokesh and established the brewery. So kept it in the family. I guess that's kind of a smart thing to do, isn't it? The New Prague Brewing Company, it was one that we most commonly associate with that site. And I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later. But the Kokesh then Mr. Kokesh hooked up with Joseph Marushka. So what we find here in all these different brewery businesses, it was like a musical chairs. And that is hard for anyone understanding or studying this, is because it was constantly revolving. They owned it for a year, they got connected with it as someone else for the next year or next 2 years. And as I said, it was just a complete revolving door. Mr. Kokesh eventually hooked up with Mr. Pie Meisel, and that ran from 1895 to 1898. And then Mr. Ratty hooked up with another group, and then Mr. Romer and Mr. Peshek Brewing Company was established in 1896. So this process of brewing continued. Now, I tried to find information as to why this was always a revolving door, but I never really have had success in doing so. But the reality is that it did occur. Mr. Piemeisel, he was a German. He went to New Ulm first and established the Baptiste Karl Brewery there. And then he came and moved to New Prague in 1898 and was a controlling partner in the New Prague Brewing Company. He died in 1901 at age 54. I don't know if you can read the information on the screen. It's a little hard, but that's why I'm boring you with going through some of this. But Mr. Piemeisel, when he died, he was associated with Matthias Riebuck at this time, between 1898 and 1905. And they called this the Piemeisel Estate Brewery, because I think his partnership and his connection with that brewery was transferred to family members. So, and it was then known as the OK Brewery, and it was a borrowed name. And I'll refer to the borrowed name came from the other brewery site in New Prague. Frank Romer, a German brewer, started the anybody need to answer a phone? Go ahead. But anyway, Frank Brewer started his brewing company in 1899 to 1900. So again, sometimes these were very short periods of time. His father was brewing in Nicollet, Minnesota. Then next year, he started the Frank Romer and Sons Brewery. So they registered, I suppose, with the state, and they had some regulation in terms of how the transfer of ownership went from one brewery member to another. Then Mr. Romer hooked up with a Mr. Kodatek in 1899 for a year, and then with Nickus Brewing Company the year after. So, I don't know, maybe they just had too much to drink. And they couldn't figure out who was who or what was what or where we should go or what we should do. But they all continued, and they succeeded. Charles Nickus got involved in 1900 through 1905 in the same location down First Avenue on the Old Montgomery Road. Now, if you're not from here, the Old Montgomery Road goes north and south, and it preceded Highway 13 that goes south that most of us travel today. But it was an old country road, and it established itself as a kind of a feeder into the rural community. Now, one thing that I found interesting is that there were many area breweries. Now, as I mentioned, the Zelenkas obviously had a brewery there. I'm not sure that if they were producing it for sales, other than consuming it for themselves, or just opening a keg when the local community came by to celebrate and to enjoy a Friday or Saturday night. It's hard to say. I don't have a member of that Zelenka family here this evening, and it's the first time I heard of this. And but there was a area brewery called the Minosh Brewery, and that was established in 1899. Now these are in the old Helena location. There was a new Helena and an old Helena. The new Helena was, if you go past the sewage treatment plant, take a left by the lake, go past the old Cedar Summit Creamery, and continue going north, you'll run into Pleasant Lake. And at Pleasant Lake was the old location of Old Helena. And that time there were blacksmith shops and general stores. The Comishes were out there as well as others. That disappeared when the railroad came. And it went to New Helena, right on the way to Jordan, along Sand Creek. And I think I have that address on here, but it would be hard for you to put that into a frame of mind. So this Minosh, it's a Moravian name, so it doesn't roll off my tongue very well. Of course, my wife says I bastardized Bohemian anyway. But anyway, the old Helena was interesting. It was very, very active, and but it wasn't the only rural brewery around New Prague. Joseph Pavek had a brewing company in Vesely, and we have photographs of that. Yeah, let's go to those photographs. So you can go, don't go so fast. You can go ahead. This is a photograph of downtown Vesely. But you notice the wagon with all the barrels? I mean, they weren't there just for picture day. They were taking it to the general store. Now this is interesting because it's dry goods and groceries. Now you have to remember that every dry goods store and general store along Main Street on Sunday night, when it was family night, the rural community came to town to do their shopping. When I came here 60 years ago, it was Thursday night. Now, but at that time, they went to Mass, and they came into town. The kids ran wild, and the men were able to belly up to the bar in the dry goods stores while their wives shopped. And so it was a social event. And it wasn't a situation where they abused it. It was just something that they became a cultural event and a happening. In other areas, there was the Honcho Brewery in Montgomery, as well as the Solik Brothers in Montgomery. The Frank Bradley, who we just talked about previously, he established a brewery in Heidelberg, which doesn't surprise me. It's an all-German community. John Chalupsky, who I mentioned previously, he also established a brewery in Montgomery. And Frank Chalupsky went to Silver Lake. Now, so did Father Tiki. So maybe that's why he went there. But Father Tiki is the one that was responsible for building St. Wenceslaus Church, paid for the chapel for him to be buried, but he got the boot, and he ended up, because he kind of bled the community dry, and then he ended up in Silver Lake. So that was a large Bohemian community as well. So just backing up a little bit, this is the Thomas Kokesh Brewery that replaced the one in the building in the previous slide. And And, one of the things that they always prided themselves, they always included a wagon with the barrels of beer, which is really interesting. Family members are out front. Notice how the young boy is kind of dressed in a Lloyd Fauntleroy outfit with a white blouse and a scarf around his neck, and dressed very, very nice. They were very proud people. Next slide. Here's another interesting slide from the Kokesh Brewery. And the wooden object at the base was used to haul the barrels and load up on the wagons, and of course you can see the barrels on the right. This was hard work. Now, the flour mill also had a barrel. What do they call that? Cooper. Thank you. And the Cooper was at the south end of the Minnesota, the New Prague Brewing, New Prague flour mill. Yeah, that's where you can go down and get shot. Anyway, this is, they have a fire range down there now. Anyway, so, but they had a Cooper, and I suppose there was this transfer of knowledge and construction that they kind of worked together. And first of all, they wouldn't have had breweries here if they didn't have access to grain and to malt and to other things. They did not use rice for brewing in New Prague. And next slide, please. And so here's another interesting photograph of the Kokesh with the wagons and the horses. And that's probably one of the reasons they located next to the creek, because they could water the horses. They were not washing the barrels. They're not jumping in there and washing themselves. They use it as probably for the horses and because they relied on them for transportation. This slide should have come at the end, but nevertheless, we learned this little lesson when my wife was breastfeeding her 3 kids. The doctor always, why are you laughing? The doctor there recommended that to increase milk production, that beer was a good way. Now my wife always claims it was to relax while you were breastfeeding. But I guess it did that, and our 3 children thrived. Now, one thing that I found kind of interesting, associated with this whole story, is soda bottling. Because when Prohibition arrived, they all changed feet, and they had to find another way to make a living. So they went into bottling soda. And so there were... What's interesting, it said that all of the breweries, all the saloons got into brewing sodas. New Prague Times said Reebok and Heinen, formerly of the New Prague Brewing Company, are now manufacturing non-intoxicating beverages, which they call Seal of Minnesota, and this drink is now on sale at various places. So later, when we come up to the table here, which we have some wonderful things on display, there are labels from those non-alcoholic beverages that have been framed and shared this evening, which really adds an interesting antidote to the whole story, I think. One of the primary soda bottling works was the Star Bottling Works, and that's across from Quick Trip on the west side of town. There's a brick house along the creek on the south of Main Street, and next to the Hunsel refinishing shop that has been recently purchased and is under renovation. So the wagons loaded up the maybe they had 2. They loaded up the pop in the lower area, part of the building where the pop was created, and then the wagons could then exit and get up onto Main Street. We have a member of the Schoenecker family here this evening, and Bill Chechka, a farm was located right at this last roundabout, so don't get dizzy, but it was right there going in that location in the south. And Bill told me that was a location of a soda bottling works as well. I didn't find, we were picking up chicken and eggs primarily when we went there, and I didn't see any remnants of a bottling business there other than a large copper container So maybe that's where they did some of the brewing of pop. The Prohibition timeline is kind of interesting, and when referring to New Prague, one of the things that I found most interesting was there was a problem in town that they had to identify the wets and the dries. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever identified yourself with being a wet or a dry, but a wet and a dry was the whole concept centered around what side of Main Street could you serve liquor and what side of Main Street was dry and you had no, you could not serve liquor. So in 1917, at the onset of Prohibition, New Prague was involved in this controversy. The part of the city will have a test of strength, the New Prague Times reported, and will act soon. New Prague is finding it hard to find a judge and clerk favoring prohibition to act at a special county option election on the Lucerne side of the city on October 25th. Saloons on the Scott County side of the town may remain open that day, but those not on the either side of the line must close. Although no dry election official could be found on the Lucerne side of the New Prague, there were 19 dry votes there on Monday night's election. There were 118 wet votes. That portion of that New Prague will remain wet. So the wets were on this side, the dries were on this side. Taxes are always cheaper on that side too, real estate tax. Must have to do with that, the wet and the dry period. That's the only thing that I can really understand. One thing that kind of came out of this era was interesting was a conversation I had with Elmer Barta. Now, Elmer Barta ran a kind of a refrigeration repair business in New Prague. He was located in the old Proshuk Hotel down on Main Street. And Elmer was born and raised in Lonsdale. And as a kid, he told me, when we interviewed him, he was taught how to play the concertinas by the gentleman across the street from his father's business. And so the bar owner, used to take Elmer on weekends to all the speakeasies in the area. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a speakeasy. My grandson was just one in New York City where he had to enter the bar through a telephone booth. So everything was kind of secretive. And Elmer was taken to Jordan to the Wagner Speakeasy. Now, where it was located, I have no idea, but maybe Rick knows. No, he's shaking his head. But in any event, that kind of grew out of that Prohibition culture. One thing that I found interesting was the fact that the Prohibition brought about interesting results. It was brought about, first of all, by women suffragettes. So you women caused the Prohibition. And the anti-drinking, and also the anti-immigrant issue. Some things never change. And as a result, the country went dry and did not become wet again until the end of Prohibition, early 30s. And New Prague voted for that. First of all, the Germans and the Czechs, the Bohemians, they did not embrace Prohibition. And I know that the first house we purchased in town, when we were only the second owners, we went down in the basement after we moved in, and here were barrels of empty bottles, wine bottles. So Grandma Stika was brewing beer, and who else knows, in her basement. Down the street was the Proshek house, and the Proshek house, one of the owners told me there was a copper boiler up on the second floor. They couldn't figure out what it was, and it was a still. Now, I know Margaret would have never approved of that. But Bill, who was the son of the Proshek, probably didn't. He was probably more accepting as well as his parents, but nevertheless, that's just kind of the sign of the times. Another interesting aspect, the pharmacies became a place to go to buy liquor. Well, you've seen this on TV, during the Wild West days, you know, they were always making these concoctions and selling them from back of wagons to an audience. But liquor at pharmacies was sometimes part of the cough medicine. My grandfather, I was born and raised in Minneapolis, and I found that my grandfather could go down to the local drugstore and get all the beer he wanted. Too much. And nevertheless, it was part of that interesting period. The religious congregations grew during this time. The congregations got larger, even though liquor was permitted to be served, I suppose, during communion. Now I don't know what the Catholics did here, but those bottles in my Grandma Shtika's basement were filled to the brim. I suppose she was providing the church with some of that. The Czechs, as I said, the Czechs and the Germans opposed prohibition. And it wasn't until later that New Prague overwhelmingly voted to end it, and so the culture continued. We have members of the Reebok family here this evening, and I'd like to introduce them to you. The brewery here has a artifact from the Reebok store, this Ma Reebok's confectionery and her husband's saloon in the back that burned, and now we have a plaza replacing it. But when that business was reported to be opening here, I approached the city of New Prague and I said, you know, that bar that used to be in the basement of City Hall where the firemen used to put out fires, where they had their meetings, whatever happened to it? And they said, well, it's in the city garages. Thank goodness. Because I then proceeded by asking them, would they be interested in sharing it with the new brewery that opened up? At least it wouldn't be chopped in half and then sent somewhere else in someone's amusement room. No, we will not give it to them, but we'll give it to the Historical Society. And as a result, that 16-foot solid mahogany Reebok bar is in the large room here as you came in the doors. So it was restored by Dave Garrow, and it's there for you to belly up. And it's a wonderful contribution to the brewery and preserving part of the community. We did create an agreement between the ownership here and the Historical Society. They can use it for the duration of their business. But at least if something would change, it would remain here. So I'm going to turn this mic over here to Elaine Reebok. You know, Lorraine is a daughter of sure. Elaine is Clara Reebok's daughter, and she was a principal when I first came to town. And maybe some of you remember her. And one thing I wanted to say, we really appreciate you coming, Elaine, from Minneapolis. And I want you also to recognize Elaine. She is a Gopher. She was the cheerleader at the University of Minnesota when she attended there. I wanted her to do a little cheer. Yeah, we'll go.
First of all, when I was a cheerleader, there were a total of 4 girls and 5 boys. Now there's an army out there, a total army, and there's a different one for each sport. We did all of them. So I was a very busy woman just being a cheerleader at Minnesota. But the picture I'm holding is very important because this is the original family, the Reebok family, that came over from the Prague area. They were actually from the southwest of the Prague area in an area that had lakes, and the name Reebok is a fisherman. But the main thing here is that 2 or 3 of the people ended up leaving New Prague to go up to Pine City, and Dennis had talked about Pine City, and they went up there. And one day, about 10, 15 years ago, a truck pulled up in front of my house in Minnetonka, and there was the Reebok name on the truck that came down all the way from Pine City area to work on the roads in Minnetonka. It's a very mixed up world. But I'm going to put this picture down and then just briefly speak about what happened on some of the. Grandpa was the one I knew, and he is in that picture. He looks a lot like a lot of my relatives, in particular Archie Ryback, who was just here, I think, less than a week ago to speak to the Rotary Club. But you can see the family resemblance there. But there's also an interest in the houses and the buildings that were also involved with the Reebok name. You know that the one has the Reebok name on the building right on Main Street. But then if you go across where the lot is empty, thank goodness for a donation from a very generous woman, as a place to hang out and have a social time. That lot had the confectionery store and this particular bar. So all of those things are in my memory. I'm getting close to the 90s age group, but I can tell you that I knew that I was part of the New Prague area because there were people all around me. I had my parents with me, of course, but there were also relatives. Aunt Polly, who is across the street in a beautiful home. There was another one of the relatives that was married to somebody in town, and those beautiful homes were there too. I was actually brought from the hospital to the home that's behind the Reebok store, the one that has the name on it. And I remember walking out and people being amazed because I was hyperactive right from the beginning. And I was walking at about 7 months out of that building, and people were astonished. And people that I've taught with since then are also astonished at my energy at this age. But the Reebok confectionery was subject to a fire. And again, that space is now a place that people can gather. Across the street, I think that building is still being used by somebody. And unfortunately, the one thing that did get demolished was the Reebok bottling works. And that was because the city needed the land, and it was on the land next to City Hall, to build an extension of City Hall. So they took down the bottling works. In the middle of the bottling works was a 3-story circular stairway. And the labels that are on this display case over here, some of them came right out of that three-story circular thing and were given back to my mother, framed, so that we'd have memories of those years. I'm no longer in this community, but this is my hometown, and I treasure the memories here. I was looking through this New Prague Times from the 1930s, and the names of my classmates are all in there. There was a Chervenka, there was a Remish, there were many other names. Those people were dear, dear friends. And I saw them until, unfortunately, some of them are passing away just due to old age and time taking its toll. But that's my story. I have great memories, and I remember one more thing that I'd like to share. And that was when the bottling works was up for sale because my father was dead and Grandpa was in his 90s. Somebody came to us and offered us a lot of money for that bottling works. My uncle, Ray Ryback, said no, it will remain in the family. And so they brought Walter Reebok back from where he was involved in the fishing industry out west to take over that bottling works. And so the name stayed on it and continued until the City Hall wanted it to be removed for the land. That's it.
Thank you, Elaine. I want to draw your attention to the photograph on the screen. That is the interior of the Reebok Saloon. Now, this was at the back of the confectionery, had its own exit onto Central, and that bar is the one that's in the room here behind us. I also want to introduce Fred Neer. Fred Neer is another Reebok family member, and Fred is the money bags of the State Historical Society. Is that correct, or should I control?
I'll also say, Janice, that I joined the New Prague Historical Society tonight, so I'm now on your team as well, and your team. No, I just would add that it's a very dear place. I came here as a child. I remembered the three-story thing because as kids, what do? You climb the three-story thing, you hang off it, you do all the dangerous things. So it's a great play place before OSHA and other rules kept small children out of the bottling works, right? But you know, the one thing I will say is that the brewery thing kind of went on a little bit with me because, you know, I went to Carleton College in Northfield. My grandmother would drive, you know, a good Czech woman would drive over and do my brother's laundry and take us to lunch and things like that. And, but, you know, when I was looking for work, you know, as a young college student, I worked on West 7th at the Schmidt Brewery on West 7th. And the only reason I got a job there, it paid very well. It was, I think, $12 an hour 40 years ago, which was real money. It paid for my Carleton tuition, but they knew that I was Wally Reebok's grandson. So you don't get welcomed in unless you're the son of or grandson of a distributor. So that was a little connection on the brewery thing that influenced my life. And you know, I'm a home brewer now. You know, and that's part of the whole culture. So anyhow, so it's great to be here with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Fred. There are many things that I could not share this evening. There are too many details, and the document that I created is just being turned over to the Historical Society for reference for future generations. Do you have any questions or anything that you'd like to add at this time? You've been a very polite audience. Yes?
I'm wondering, Elaine, do you know how many years they made soda? How many years that what they made soda? Oh, well, okay, when their grandma was put to jail for still brewing beer, then they decided to go to soda. And they did that from the start of Prohibition to, you know, until the bottling works were destroyed.
I think, yeah, they would have stopped in the 70s
Yeah.
when the business was sold. Because they sold it and it operated for about 4 more years. I think Wally sold it in the 70s. Right?
Yeah, that would be
And they actually distributed a lot of stuff, but they actually made stuff there for quite a while. You know, I think they were mostly a distributor after that, but they had all sorts of these private label brands that aren't available anymore that you don't see. It wasn't just Coke and Pepsi, it was, you know, a whole bunch of different, very sugary stuff.
Thank you, Fred. We just have a few more slides before we conclude. And we have these in our collection. And I should just paraphrase this by complimenting the new generation that has taken over the Historical Society. And they're very energetic, they're young, and have lots of great ideas. And I personally appreciate them, and hopefully you do as well. This is the Topka's Saloon, and the Topkas were not only in the banking business, they made their business here. So where Hertau's floor is located, there was a general store on the left, and the Grandma Topka ran that, and then the saloon was on the right. They also had a chicken hatchery in the back, and then lived on the other side of the alley, but initially they lived behind the building. The second floor was a dance hall. You can see the balcony where the brass band used to play and entertain and welcome and encourage people to come up to the steps on the side of the building and dance the night away. Next slide. What interesting thing I found is how the Jacob Schmidt Brewery, not controlled, but they enabled bar owners to establish saloons. So Peshek's Bar, I think it's called the Rusty something down at the end of Main Street. What is it called? The Rusty Spoke. Oh yeah. So the Rusty Spoke is where the Peshek's Bar was, and they owned the land. They held the mortgage. And then they gave money to get the business started. And then when it came to fitting the bar, they provided the bar, the spigots, and all the interesting things that were part of the saloon culture. Next slide, please. Bartizal's when I came to town, it was the Simon's Bar. But the Bartizal bar was very interesting. We don't have any artifacts or memorabilia other than photographs. There are Bartizal family members in the community, in the area. Next slide. And then the Red Lion was where what is it called today? The bargain store? Do you remember who these individuals are? We were trying to identify. My wife looked at, I asked her if it was an old boyfriend, but she couldn't, it wasn't. She couldn't identify. They looked familiar. As a teacher, we did not frequent the bars in town, so I don't have any idea. Next slide. Yeah, it was Wood, Arlie Wood. But I don't think that's Arlie Wood behind the bar. This is after Arlie Wood. Okay. Any questions? I suppose you're all dry. Oh, yes.
Okay, thanks. Real quick, we have another speaker. So we've explored a lot of the historic aspect of breweries, but we also are in a brewery today. So we thought it would be fun to bring Erin Hutton up, the owner here at Giesenbrau, to talk a little bit about what brewing looks like today. So Dennis has given us a lot of great information. So Erin's just going to share a little bit about what brewing is to him today, a little bit about his history and all those great things.
Hey guys. So, not sure where to pick up after that. Our history, if you guys don't know, quick, I met my wife Anna, who is a Gießen. We actually met in Munich. We were both studying German, but had a passion for beer. And like a lot of people in the early 2000s, that was kind of when a lot of craft breweries were really getting a lot of steam. So we met in Munich. We came back to the States. I worked on my grad degree in actually studying German, but decided that I wanted to focus my German studies on brewing, and got a job in the craft brewing industry, and then worked with a master brewer, trained with him for 3 years in Colorado. And then we, at that point, had bought a house, and we decided if we sold our house in Colorado, because the housing market was already crazy out there, we could buy this and move back to New Prague and open a brewery, because there hadn't been one here since pre-Prohibition, right? Because after that, they were all bottling soda. So that's like a little bit of our history. We've been open for 7.5 years now. We opened in 2017. Craft beering, from a history standpoint, like after Prohibition, that knocked out so many of these breweries, like Dennis was saying. There was a brewery in every little town around here. And after Prohibition, they consolidated. The guys got big. After the war, basically it got down to like Coors and Budweiser and Miller, and they controlled everything. And craft brewing was kind of a pushback against that started in the 70s when Jimmy Carter signed a law that you could homebrew. And then people started traveling back to Europe and saying like, wow, it doesn't all have to taste like light, water. So that was the kind of the Kickstarter for that. And then after that law got passed, then the states slowly started changing their laws so that people could open breweries. I think Colorado beat California by like a day as far as the first 2 states where you could have a craft brewery. And then it just slowly kind of cascaded across the country. There was a big boom in the 90s, and then a few of them kind of fell off. And then after the housing market crash in 2008, a lot of really cheap warehouse land became available. So a lot of breweries were like, oh, this is the time. Like, I've been home brewing, I've won some awards, or whatever, and they, you could buy a warehouse really, really cheap. So that was like the next big push, and that's kind of what we were living through until COVID. That kind of knocked everybody around a little bit, but a lot of us are still here, so. But yeah, so that's kind of like how we are and where we've come to be, and now with as many craft breweries as there are pretty much every little village, like like it used to be, but every town has a brewery now, and so it's kind of come back to that. But yeah, any questions about any of that?
How many breweries are in Minnesota right now, do you know? There are-
Over 200. There's a lot. We're finally at a point in the craft brewing industry where we are all still friends because we're still trying to beat the big guys, but we're also competing a little bit more against each other because, you know, even when we opened, I think there was like 120. So there's 80 more breweries, and there's, you know, there wasn't one in, well, there was one in Jordan and Montgomery, but now there's extras in St. Peter. There's a whole bunch in the south suburbs, and so it's been going, or growing, I should say. There's over 10,000 breweries in the country now, and when we opened, there was only like 6,000.
Mike, you got a question? Do you have any of the old recipes?
I've asked Dennis a few times, and I was going to ask him again if he came across anything looking for this, because I haven't seen any. We were talking about trying to just recreate something pre-Prohibition lager, because that's, imagine what they would have been brewing in this area. But I haven't come across anything that's specific to this area, but like, I was gonna double check in this book. I mean, there's a lot of those smaller breweries, and there's probably somebody that's got a recipe that's pretty close to what they would have been brewing. So we're gonna look into that and see if we can't brew something.
Are you allowed to retail your beer outside of this establishment?
Yeah, we're so small. That distribution is its own animal. We tried for a couple of years, and we had some kind of structural changes last year in management and stuff. And so with that, we decided to pull back and focus back on the brewery, because with as many breweries as there is, fighting for that little bit of space to get a tap line or to have cans in the liquor store, it's a challenge. And as small as we are, it's a lot more effective for us to focus on the tap room and the community, events like this, you know, and kind of be here on campus instead of driving around town trying to sell a couple cases of beer. So,
Where do you get your recipes, and is it another brewery that they kind of get them from Germany or so, or is it trial and error, or what do you come up with yours?
well, so part of my studying with a master brewer for 3 years, and like I also got my Cicerone certification, which is kind of like a beer sommelier. So I studied beer and I studied historical recipes, and some recipes are classic. Like a Hefeweizen is a Hefeweizen because you brew it a certain way. Same with the Helles. If you deviate outside of the parameters, then it's a different beer. So I take those, and, you know, and then you kind of make them your own, and you develop your own process to come up with those kind of beers. Some beers you have a lot more leeway. You can just, you know, throw all kinds of stuff at the mash tun. But a lot of it is just learning what the different grains will do and how the yeast is going to affect it and how long you need to ferment and the temperatures, which when you study with somebody that's been a master brewer, then you learn all that stuff, and then you can kind of go off on your own and make your own recipes. So some of them are, I mean, all the recipes are my design. Like I've written all the recipes, but I learned how to brew from somebody, so I knew kind of what I was looking at, so I could do that. And there's a lot of historical references and beer books that have recipes and have guides and tell you, like, you know, if you're trying to brew a Helles, then you should probably follow these things, and you kind of take that stuff to take it in when you're designing a recipe.
Question about, you know, the early pioneer brewers that came over, they brought, you know, with them, but you had to grow barley, you had, what I wonder is barley was easy to grow. Did they have trouble with getting hops, you know, back in the 1800s?
Yeah, I mean, well, so hops grow wild around here. So I'm not sure that they had the same sort of growing. I would imagine they brought some hops from the old world because they had hop farms way back when. I mean, they were already growing in Germany and in the Czech Republic and everything. So they probably could have brought the rhizomes with, because you know hops, it's just a rhizome, you put it in the ground. Once it's in there, you better want it there because it's not going away. It's kind of like rhubarb. It'll just keep coming back no matter what you do. So I imagine they brought some over, or they found wild ones. Also in the 1800s, I know in America and early on they didn't use as many hops, and hops weren't as popular until later anyway. But they would find spices and other wild herbs and stuff that they would put in beer. Yeah, that's been the main source for beer for a long time. So ever since the Germans outlawed using wheat in the 1500s with the Reinheitsgebot.
Your menu or your selection here is pretty traditional here in beer. You have a lot of craft breweries. Every fruit note they got is thrown in there. Chocolate, this. Is that's intentional, right? You said about the traditional German. I mean, you said you spent time in Munich, but I'm interested in how you select what you want to serve here.
So it is very intentional. The brewery that I worked at in Colorado, we were one of those breweries. We had 56 taps on the wall, and then we brought in only craft beer from Colorado breweries because we were a brew pub, so we had beer from other breweries, and then we had 4 to 8 taps that were ours. And since I could buy an IPA from Summit and buy a pale ale from somebody else and whatever, all we did was brew. Like we brewed a Hawaiian pizza beer, or we brewed beer with Nutella, or we brewed beer with Twinkies, or cereal, or fruit, or whatever. Like you said, we put everything we could into those mash tuns. And because of my experience in Germany, when I was like, well, I'm going to open my brewery, I want to brew beer. I want to brew beer that tastes like beer and is traditional, and so that's why we focus on like Helles and Hefeweizen and all the other lagers. And then we still want our other beers to taste like beer. You don't need to make a IPA that's not. I'm not into that. Any other questions? Well, thanks to you guys for hosting this event here. This is awesome. If you guys have any other questions, you can always find me. I'm here all the time now. So.
Thank you very much. One thing I want to mention is when I did an exhibit a number of years ago at the library on Brewing and Prague, so highlighting the brewery business here, I forgot that I had written this, and someone shared that with me this evening, that John Peshek and H.W. Heinen and Mr. Schreiner, he was a banker in town, they bought the Radley Brewery south of town for $10,000 and brought a brewer from Minneapolis, and they announced that a new Pilsner beer was starting on December 31st. So when the question came up what kind of beer, Pilsner was the preferred, which is a traditional Czech beer. Before we close this evening, I want to draw your attention to the exhibit behind me. We have many people from our organization and others that brought some interesting brewery artifacts, the Minark pop crate, the Dupreg bottling box, and a spigot, and some explanation, and the labels and photographs. So take some time to come up here and take a look at it. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Erin. Thank you guys for sharing your knowledge, and for all of the family members and people that told stories tonight. I feel like what really makes that connection with our community is when we can talk to not only somebody who's knowledgeable in the brewing business, but the family members that actually were a part of that and lived that. So it was really neat. So thank you. I appreciate you guys doing that. This concludes our evening. So again, come on up, take a look at some of the items we have up here, some of the photos. The photos that we showed up on the screen tonight, we do have those photos here with us. So if you'd like to take a look at them a little bit up closer, we've got them at the table back there as well. And we appreciate you guys coming out, and have a wonderful night. Grab another beer and have a wonderful night. Thank you, everyone.